June 2025 was supposed to be a season of adventure. The forests were thick with life, the rivers ran cold and clean, and campers from all over had poured into the deep wilderness to escape the choking buzz of city life. They came with tents, rifles, and stories to swap around the fire, but something unnatural moved through the trees that month. Park rangers stopped responding to radio calls. Hunters found mutilated carcasses arranged in ritualistic shapes. Campers vanished without a trace, or worse, came back changed. Locals whispered of ancient creatures awakened by blood, of skinwalkers that mimicked human voices in the dark, and of a gaunt figure with hollow eyes seen stalking campsites just before dawn. A Wendigo. And those who survive to speak of it don't speak of it for long. These are the best true scary stories of June 2025. You've been warned. Stay out of the woods. Story 1. A hunter goes missing after following a voice that sounds exactly like his brother who died last year. ChatGPT said, "It was just past the first week of June 2025 when Eric, a seasoned hunter, entered the dense backcountry of Montana's Bitterroot Range. He had been there before, several times in fact, and knew the land better than most. With a rifle slung across his back and a pack filled with supplies, he moved confidently along the worn trails that twisted through the towering pines. The wilderness was alive with sound crickets, distant crows, the wind pushing through the leaves, but nothing felt wrong. Not yet. As night fell, Eric made camp near a shallow creek, the sky painted with stars and the air sharp with the chill of elevation. He was alone, but that never bothered him. What did catch him off guard, however, was the voice he heard just before sleep took him. It came faintly through the wood, soft, hoarse, and unmistakably familiar. It sounded exactly like his brother Mark. But Mark had died nearly a year ago. Eric jolted awake, unsure if the voice had been real or part of a dream. The campfire had burned low, casting strange, dancing shadows on the trees around him. He scanned the dark woods but saw nothing. No movement, no eyes reflecting in the firelight. Still, he couldn't shake the voice. It wasn't just similar to Mark's, it was Mark's. The tone, the rasp, even the subtle way he used to say Eric's name. It pulled at a deep, buried place in Eric's chest. The grief he thought he'd buried months ago came rushing back like a flood. He told himself it had to be his mind playing tricks, the loneliness getting to him, or perhaps a dream bleeding into reality. But the forest didn't feel right anymore. The comforting hum of insects and rustling leaves seemed to fade into something else, something quieter, more watchful. He stoked the fire higher and stayed awake for hours, gripping his rifle tightly, trying to listen for the voice again. But the woods had gone silent. The next day, he tried to move on, deeper into the forest, hoping the fresh air and focus of tracking might ground him again. Yet with every step, he felt the pressure of unseen eyes. The wildlife seemed scarce, the usual signs of deer and elk missing entirely. Even the birds were fewer. As he reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley, he froze. On the far slope, in a break between the trees, stood a figure, tall, still, not quite human. Eric raised his scope to get a better look, but by the time he adjusted his aim, the figure had vanished. The uneasy feeling grew heavier. That night, as he set up camp near a rocky outcrop, the voice came again, louder, closer, calling his name in a familiar cadence. That clawed at his sanity. He didn't answer. He didn't move. He just sat frozen, staring into the woods as the voice repeated, again and again, like it was circling his camp. Then it stopped. Silence. But in the dead stillness, he heard twigs snap behind his tent. In the morning, he found large prints surrounding his campsite. They weren't animal tracks. At least not any he recognized. Elongated, bare, and almost human except for the way the toes pointed slightly outward and the length of the stride. He considered turning back, but something inside him urged him to continue some strange, unexplained pull. He walked for hours through thickets and slopes, deeper into uncharted woods, driven by a mixture of dread and obsession. At one point, he found a piece of torn flannel snagged on a branch, the exact color his brother used to wear. There were no paths now, no signs of other hunters, just the rising sense that he was being led. That night, he built no fire. He just sat in the dark, listening, waiting. And when the voice returned, it didn't sound like Mark anymore. It sounded like something trying to sound like him, but getting it wrong in small, eerie ways. The next morning, Eric was exhausted. His thoughts were jumbled, memories bleeding into hallucinations. He questioned if he had eaten enough, drunk enough water, yet the forest didn't feel natural anymore. It was darker even in daylight. Like the canopy overhead it thickened. Around noon, he stumbled across a clearing filled with bones. Not just animal bones, there were human remains too, aged and weathered, some piled, some arranged. It was a place of death, untouched by animals or rot. In the center sat a small, wooden totem carved with twisted faces. Eric backed away slowly, but something moved in the trees behind him. He turned, expecting to see a bear or mountain lion. What he saw instead stood tall on two legs, thin and skeletal, with skin stretched over bone and a mouth that opened too wide. It didn't chase him. It didn't speak. It just watched. Eric ran. He didn't stop until night fell, and by then, he was lost. He tried using the stars, but clouds had rolled in, hiding the sky. He tried listening for the crick he'd camped by, but the forest gave him only silence and the sound of his own breath. Then he heard footsteps. Not behind him. Beside him, matching his pace. He turned on his flashlight, shaking hands, aiming it into the trees. Nothing, but when he looked back, there was a figure standing in his path. A perfect replica of his brother, smiling in a way Mark never did. Something was wrong with its eyes, empty, like two black holes. Eric ran again, crashing through brush, tearing his clothes, cutting his face on branches. The figure didn't chase. It just stood there, watching. Eric was never seen again. A search party found his camp days later, along with his gear and rifle, both untouched. His boots were there too, neatly placed beside the fire pit, but he wasn't. The only clue was a recording on a small handheld radio found in his pack. The final few seconds played a single, broken message, on repeat. His own voice, whispering, "Mark, I saw you. But it's not you. It's not." Then static. "They say, the woods out there are haunted, cursed. Even, locals won't go past the ridge anymore." Hikers report hearing their own names whispered from the trees, and hunters speak of shadows that mimic loved ones long gone. Whatever Eric found out there, whatever called to him in the dark, it wasn't his brother. And it's still waiting, hungry for the next voice to answer back. Story 2. A park ranger stumbles upon an unmarked campsite filled with bones and a journal that ends mid. It started as a normal patrol through the heart of Grand Hollow National Forest. Ranger Thomas Griggs had worked the area for over a decade and knew its rhythms like the back of his hand. The way the wind sounded through the pine needles, the call patterns of different birds, the usual paths taken by hikers and campers. But that morning in mid-June 2025, something felt different. The sun had risen behind heavy grey clouds, dimming the forest in a way that made the trees appear closer, more menacing. The radio strapped to his belt, always a comforting crackle of updates and chatter, had gone eerily silent. Even the wildlife seemed absent. No rustle of deer or chip, just the crunch of his boots over leaves and the occasional groan of old trees shifting in the breeze. As he followed a narrow, less-used trail near Ridgewater Creek, Thomas spotted something unusual, a campsite hidden between thick brush, completely The park maintained logs of every visitor, but this one wasn't on any list. The tent was old and sagging, canvas instead of nylon, as if it had been there for years, but it hadn't rotted. The air around it was strangely cold, even though the weather was warm. He approached cautiously, one hand on the grip of his sidearm, and pushed aside the flap. What he saw made his stomach twist. Inside was a pile of bones, small ones at first, like birds or squirrels, then larger, human-sized femurs, and ribs stacked beneath a blanket, darkened with dried blood. No sign of struggle, just bones, clean, arranged like a forgotten shrine. Lying beside the bones was a journal. Its cover was cracked, leather, stained, and nearly unreadable. But the entries inside told a story. Someone had been living there alone for months, maybe longer. The writing became increasingly erratic, shifting from nature notes to frantic scribbles about voices in the trees, shadows that followed without making sound, and something the writer only called the hunger. The last few pages were almost illegible, but one sentence was repeated over and over. "It knows I'm watching, but it was watching first." The final entry cut off mid-sentence, the ink trailing like the pen had been yanked from the writer's hand. Thomas backed out slowly, heart pounding. He tried the radio again, but it spat nothing but static. His GPS refused to load, blinking red like he'd left service range, but he was nowhere near the dead zones. He decided to mark the location and return with backup. But, as he turned back toward the trail, he noticed something. His own footprints, not just behind him, around him, as if someone, or something, had been circling while he was inside the tent. The soil was soft, but the prints were wrong. Too wide, toes spaced far apart, like a barefoot person who walked differently. And there were no signs of anyone running, just slow, methodical steps. Closer to his, he quickened his pace, retracing his steps toward the main service road, though the trail now looked unfamiliar. Trees, he didn't remember. A fork in the path that shouldn't have been there. He chose the left route, heart racing, every rustle and creak amplifying into phantom sounds. Then, from deeper within the woods, came a soft sound. A whistle, faint, steady, and rising in pitch. It mimicked the call all rangers used to signal each other when radios failed. But it didn't come from ahead. It came from everywhere. First, left, then right, then behind. Something was imitating it. Not exactly, but close enough to make his skin crawl. As night fell and the forest turned black, Thomas stumbled onto a clearing he didn't recognize. In the center stood a tall, rotting tree, hollowed at the base. Inside the hollow, something gleamed. He approached cautiously and discovered a ranger's badge wedged into the wood, half buried in moss. The name on it, R. Wilkes. That was impossible. Ranger Wilkes had gone missing in 2009. They found his truck and nothing else. No remains, no gear, just gone. But here was his badge, fresh as if placed only days ago. Thomas turned to leave, but then he saw them, dozens of faint figures watching from the edge of the clearing, unmoving, barely more than outlines. They didn't blink, they didn't breathe, and as he tried to shine his flashlight on them, the beam flickered and died. Thomas was never heard from again. His vehicle remained parked at the ranger station. His logbook showed that he had entered Ridgewater Territory on June 14th, but never returned. The strange campsite was later searched, but no tent, bones, or journal could be found. Dust disturbed soil and scratch marks on nearby trees. And the hollow tree. It was there, yes, but empty. No badge. A new ranger assigned to the area several weeks later reported hearing something strange on his second patrol. A voice on the radio, static heavy, barely audible. But just before the signal dropped completely, he swore he heard someone whisper, "It knows I'm watching." The signal never came back, and that section of the forest is now permanently closed to all rangers, and everyone else. Story 3, campers find claw marks on the inside of their tent. No memory of the night before. It was late June 2025 when 3 college friends, they were experienced hikers, confident, outdoorsmen, and armed with maps, supplies, and gear. They picked a spot well off the beaten path, far from campsites and tourists, where they could relax under the stars, without distraction. The first night was calm, filled with laughter and the crackle of a fire, but a strange unease began to creep in after midnight. They all reported the same thing the next morning. Restless dreams, shadowy figures just outside the tent, and a suffocating sense of being watched. At first, they laughed it off, but none of them could explain the deep claw marks they found on the inside of the tent walls when they unzipped them. None of the 3 could remember waking up during the night. Yet the damage to the tent was real. For long slashes, deep and ragged, on the inside fabric like something had tried to get out. Not it. Confused but not yet alarmed, they blamed a prank, or maybe even one of them moving in their sleep with a tool or knife. They patched the damage and carried on, hiking through a nearby ravine to explore an abandoned fire tower. As they walked, they noticed strange carvings on the trees. Not initials or trail markers. These were crude symbols, spirals, and jagged shapes, carved deep into the bark, all pointing in the direction they had come from. Danny joked nervously about ancient curses, but none of them laughed very hard. As the sun set, a heavy fog rolled in, silencing the woods. The usual calls of birds and insects vanished, and the forest grew oppressively still. That night, the real fear set in. Around 2 a.m., Logan woke up drenched in sweat, shivering despite the warm summer air. He stepped outside the tent to get fresh air, and noticed something. Odie's sleeping bag was zipped up, but it was empty. Then he heard it. A whisper, just one word, his name. Not from behind him, not from the forest, but from inside the tent. He turned and stared, unable to speak, as the tent seemed to move just slightly, like someone was shifting inside. He grabbed his flashlight and shone it through the fabric. Empty. Both his friends lay still. Nothing was there. But the whisper came again, this time behind him, deep and low, as if the trees themselves were breathing his name. The next morning, none of them felt rested. Travis had scratches on his arms he couldn't explain. Danny swore he saw someone standing at the edge of the clearing right before dawn, tall, gaunt, unmoving. They decided to cut the trip short, but when they packed up their gear, they noticed something strange. Their GPS devices were dead. Phones too. Batteries were fully charged the night before, but now nothing worked. Even the compass spun erratically. They tried to follow the trail they came in on, but it had disappeared. Trees they didn't recognize. Landmarks missing. Paths that looped back on themselves. Panic set in. The woods had changed, as if they were no longer in the same forest they'd entered. By sunset, they were hopelessly lost. They made another camp, though none of them spoke much. Sleep was out of the question. All three lay still in their bags, listening to the woods shift and creak. That night, the tent shook violently, as if something massive had landed on it. But when they rushed out, rifles in hand, the clearing was empty. No footprints, no signs of life, just silence, and the feeling of 1,000 unseen eyes watching. That was the last night they would all be together. In the morning, Danny was gone. His gear, his boots, everything was left behind. No signs of struggle, no trail to follow, just a smear of ash where his sleeping bag had been. Logan and Travis searched for hours, screaming his name, leaving markers, trying everything to find him. But the forest remained unhelpful, like it had swallowed him whole. That night, they didn't sleep. They sat by the fire, guns in their laps, backs to each other for safety. That's when Logan noticed it his own name, etched into the bark of a nearby tree, as if it had been there for years. Beneath it was Danny's name. Then Travis's, carved in the same style as the strange symbols from earlier. That's when the whispering returned, in every direction. Only Logan made it out. 3 days later, he was found wandering near the highway, barefoot and covered in dirt, eyes wide and glassy, repeating a single sentence over and over. We never left the tent. Authorities searched the forest for days. No sign of Danny or Travis was ever found. Their gear, their camp, and even the original trail into the forest had vanished. To this day, Logan refuses to sleep in a room with closed walls. He insists the tent never opened, that they're still in it, that what walked out wasn't really him. And when asked what happened, he simply says, something else was dreaming with us. No one dares to camp in that part of the Appalachians anymore. The trees whisper names now, names of those not yet lost. Story for a hiker records his descent into madness, as he is stalked by a figure that never blinks. In late June 2025, a video surfaced on a fringe survivalist forum, a series of short, glitchy clips recorded by a hiker named Mason Reed. He had gone alone into the northern Rockies, planning a 2-week solo trek through remote terrain. The video was never meant for public release. It was recovered from an SD card found inside a torn hiking boot left beside an abandoned trailhead. What begins as a standard wilderness vlog soon spirals into something disturbing, a real-time descent into paranoia, isolation, and something far more sinister. The early footage shows Mason, in high spirits, laughing, filming the views, and narrating his journey. He points out animal tracks, sets up camp by a glacial stream, and even jokes about his forest audience. But over the course of the next few entries, his demeanor changes. He starts whispering to the camera, checking over his shoulder constantly. The clips become shorter, more frantic. One video shows him waking up in a panic, convinced something had touched his tent. In another, he films tree trunks covered in deep gouges that hadn't been there the day before. He claims he's being followed, but when he turns the camera around, there's no one in sight, just endless woods, quiet and empty. By day 4, the forest appears to change. Landmarks repeat themselves. The same twisted stump shows up in 3 different videos. Even though Mason insists he's been walking in a straight line, his voice cracks as he speaks, eyes darting wildly. He says something's been leaving gifts at his camp, strange bundles of bones and feathers wrapped in moss. He doesn't know whether to be afraid or grateful. One clip is just audio, recorded in complete darkness, where Mason whispers, "It's copying me." Not exactly, but close enough to scare me. In the distance, something moves. It mimics his breathing perfectly. Then, silence. The final few clips are nearly on. The camera jerks wildly, showing glimpses of Mason's face, blood on his shirt, his eyes wide and glassy. He speaks slowly now, slurred, like he hasn't slept in days. He says he saw himself walking in the distance, carrying his pack and smiling. But when he ran to confront it, it turned and vanished. Later, he found footprints leading in circles around his camp, perfectly matching his own boots. In one frame, he holds up his journal. The last page reads, "I think it's wearing me. I think I'm not me anymore." The last entry on the SD card is a single, 6-second clip. Mason stands still in front of the camera, staring straight into the lens. He's smiling, but the expression is off too wide, too strained. Behind him, in the blurred trees, is another figure, identical to Mason, still watching. Then the screen goes black. Search and rescue teams were deployed after Mason's emergency beacon was briefly activated, but no trace of him was found. Just his boot and the SD card. Experts analyzed the footage and ruled most of it as a mental breakdown caused by isolation. But they couldn't explain the final frame. In the metadata, the file wasn't created by Mason's device. It came from a different camera model, entirely one he never carried. To this day, hikers report sightings of a lone man wandering the woods, waving from behind trees, smiling with too many teeth. When approached, he disappears. But sometimes, he's seen again, further down the trail, smiling, waving, closer each time. Story 5. A lone fisherman encounters a Wendigo near the river and leaves behind only a blood-soaked radio transmission. The fisherman's name was Paul Garrison, a quiet, reclusive man in his late 50s who spent every summer on the edge of Cold Pine Lake in northern Minnesota. He fished alone, away from towns and tourists, in a part of the forest few dared to explore. Locals knew him as a good man, but odd someone who claimed the woods talked when no one was listening. On June 29, 2025, Paul made his last known radio transmission. It was brief, frantic, and filled with static. But one thing came through clearly. He said the Wendigo was real, and it had found him. The authorities arrived 2 days later, following the ping from his emergency beacon. They found his boat drifting near the southern shore, engine off, oars untouched. Inside was a large tackle box, several unopened beers, and a trail of blood that led from the deck to the water's edge. Paul's fishing rod was snapped clean in half. Nearby, in the mud along the shoreline, were hoof-like prints not from any known animal. Some appeared upright, like a deer had been walking on 2 legs. No sign of Paul was ever found, but deep in the reeds, searchers found his handheld radio. It was cracked and soaked, but the recording was still intact. The first part of the audio was normal. Paul spoke softly, narrating his catch of the day, complaining about the heat and joking about bad spirits in the woods. But after sunset, the tone changed. He began whispering. He said he could see something moving between the trees on the far side of the lake, something tall, pale, and emaciated. He described it walking on long legs, with a mouth that stretched far too wide and eyes that didn't reflect light ease that absorbed it. Paul whispered that it wasn't hunting like a bear or wolf. It was watching, waiting, learning. Then he went silent for nearly 10 minutes, only to return with one chilling line. It just said my name. The static worsened, but Paul kept recording. He said it was closer now, that it didn't walk it, glided, that the trees bent slightly in its path, as though the final 30 seconds of the tape are what investigators still can't explain. Paul's voice becomes panicked, and in the background is something else. A second voice, garbled, echoing Paul's words back to him with a slight delay, like a mocking reflection. Then came a scream not of pain, but of realization. Paul seemed to understand something in that final moment, something terrible. He whispered, "It's not outside anymore," followed by a wet, dragging sound and the radio cutting off mid. Locals say Cold Pine Lake is cursed now. Strange sounds echo across the water at night, whispers, screams, and sometimes, Paul's voice calling out for help. Park rangers avoid the southern shore completely. Visitors have reported seeing a figure in the shallows during foggy mornings, thin, unmoving, with empty black holes for eyes. And always, before the figure vanishes, it raises a hand and waves, just once, as if it knows you're listening, as if it remembers you.